I never imagined my entire life could collapse in a single afternoon. 6 months after my mother passed away, I inherited the house she left behind, a quiet place filled with memories I wasn't ready to let go of. But almost immediately, my wife Rachel began pushing me to sell it or sign it over to her. She said it was for the future of our family, but something in her voice felt like a threat rather than a plea. When I hesitated, she told me she would file for divorce and take the kids with her. I thought she was just overwhelmed, grieving in her own way. Then the DNA test results arrived, the kit she bought as a fun Christmas gift. 2 lines of text that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Neither of the children I had raised for years was biologically mine. The email with the DNA results arrived just after midnight, a quiet ping on my phone that felt strangely ominous. I opened it expecting nothing more than a quirky ancestry breakdown, maybe something I could joke about with Rachel in the morning. Instead, I froze as soon as I saw the highlighted section showing no genetic relation detected. For a second, I thought it had to be an error. Maybe the lab mixed up samples or something went wrong with the kit. But as I scrolled down, the explanation grew painfully clear. Emily, the bright, curious girl who hugged me every night and called me daddy, shared genetic markers not with me, but with my own younger brother, Mark. I stared at the screen, hoping I was misreading, but the percentages were precise, undeniable, cold. Then came Jacob's results. Not mine either. His markers pointed straight to Ryan, the muscular personal trainer Rachel had insisted on hearing after her post-pregnancy confidence issues. My hands were shaking, but my mind went eerily calm, like someone had flipped a switch to keep me from falling apart. I read the report again. Then again. Every reread cut deeper, but I forced myself to swallow the pain and keep breathing. Nothing made sense, yet everything suddenly did. The late-night texts Rachel claimed were work emergencies. The weekends she said she needed, time alone to recharge. The odd distance she kept from my family, especially from Mark. I felt something inside me crack, but I didn't let it break me completely. Crying or screaming wasn't going to help. Not now. Not when there were 2 kids asleep upstairs who still needed breakfast in the morning, and someone to remind them their world was safe. I set my phone down and just sat there, staring into the dark living room. Minutes felt like hours, as I tried to understand how long this betrayal had been unfolding right under my nose. Then a strange clarity hit me. If Rachel was capable of using divorce and the children as leverage to pressure me about the house, she was capable of much worse once she realized I knew the truth. If I confronted her now, rage and denial might drive her to do something reckless. So I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would act normally until I knew exactly what I was facing. I would gather evidence, protect myself legally, and above all, protect the kids. I reopened my laptop and started saving everything I could find: emails between her and Mark, flirtatious messages with Ryan, calendar entries she had forgotten to delete. There were photos, hidden folders, hotel bookings, and conversations that erased any remaining illusion of accidental betrayal. Every new file tightened the knot in my chest, but I kept going. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed the truth laid out clearly, without room for manipulation or lies. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I had built a timeline of her affairs stretching back nearly a decade. I watched the sunrise in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own life, but also knowing one thing with certainty. This wasn't the moment I lost my family. This was the moment I finally saw what it really was. Rachel didn't notice the change in me at first. I still made breakfast, still asked about her day, still kissed the kids goodnight. But beneath that calm surface, every second felt like I was walking across thin ice, waiting for the slightest crack to expose everything. I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever, so I scheduled a meeting with a family law attorney recommended by a colleague. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Linda, someone who looked like she'd seen every kind of marital disaster imaginable. When I explained the situation, she didn't interrupt, didn't show shock, didn't pity me. She simply listened, took notes, and let the silence settle when I finished. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "What your wife has done is paternity fraud. And threatening to take the children unless you sign over property, especially inherited property, could be interpreted as extortion." Hearing those words out loud made everything feel heavier, more real. I wasn't just dealing with a broken marriage. I was dealing with someone who had systematically lied, manipulated, and used the children as bargaining chips. Linda asked if I wanted to pursue full custody. The question caught me off guard. "They're not biologically mine," I said quietly. "That doesn't matter," she replied. "You've been their father their entire lives. Courts consider emotional bonds and stability, not just DNA." I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. For a moment, something inside me loosened, like a knot I'd been holding for weeks finally untangled a little. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail. She told me what evidence to keep, what messages to archive, what not to say to Rachel under any circumstances. She emphasized staying calm, avoiding conflict, and documenting everything. Before I left, she handed me a folder. Inside were the initial drafts for both a divorce petition and a temporary restraining order, preventing Rachel from relocating the kids or making major financial moves without consent. Walking out of her office, I felt both terrified and strangely empowered. For the first time since the DNA results, I had a roadmap. I had a plan. When I got home, Rachel was in the kitchen scrolling on her phone, irritated because her gym session had been canceled. She barely looked up when I walked in. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, like I was watching a performance of a life that no longer belonged to me. That night, while she slept, I backed up the last few pieces of evidence. I transferred important documents to a secure drive and called the bank to set up alerts and protections on my accounts. I even checked on the kids, watching them breathe softly in their beds, their faces peaceful and unaware of the storm approaching. I promised myself that whatever happened next, they would come first. They would never blame themselves for the choices adults made. By the end of the week, everything was in place. The petition, the restraining order, the evidence organized and ready. I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was acting to protect the future Rachel had so casually threatened to destroy. And though she had no idea yet, the countdown to the end of our marriage had already begun. The day Rachel's ultimatum expired felt strangely calm, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She walked into the living room, holding the property transfer papers like they were already signed. Her expression was cold and certain, the look of someone who believed she had already won. She placed the papers on the coffee table and said, "If you don't sign this today, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. And I'm taking the kids with me." Her voice didn't tremble. Mine didn't either when I responded. "I won't be signing anything," I said. Instead, I set down the envelope containing the divorce petition and the temporary restraining order. Rachel stared at them as if she didn't understand the words printed on the front. Then she looked up at me with a confused laugh, the kind people use when they think they're being pranked. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply told her the truth. "I know about the DNA results." For a few seconds, Rachel's face drained of color. She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried to force a smile. "That test must be wrong," she whispered. But she wasn't whispering to me. She was whispering to herself. I slid the printed results across the table. Her hands shook as she picked them up. She scanned the document, her breathing growing shallow, her shoulders tensing, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "This doesn't mean anything," she finally said. "We can fix this. We can talk to the company. Maybe they switched samples. Maybe." "Rachel," I interrupted quietly. It's over. For the first time in years, she didn't have a rehearsed answer. She folded into herself, clutching the paper like it could somehow erase the words on it. But after a moment, her shock twisted into anger. You set me up, she snapped. You think you can just take my kids away. They're our kids, I said. And I'm protecting them. She laughed, loud, hysterical, bitter. You. Protect them. They're not even yours. The silence that followed that sentence was suffocating. It hung between us like a verdict she had just pronounced on herself. I told her the restraining order prevented her from removing the children from the house or making any major decisions without court approval. I reminded her that the evidence had already been filed and that the court hearing was already scheduled. Rachel's fury dissolved into panic. She tried to grab her phone, but I calmly told her the documents were already in the hands of my attorney and the court. Nothing she did now would change what was coming. A few hours later, I called my brother Mark and sent him the evidence related to Emily. I did the same with Ryan regarding Jacob. The silence on the other end of the phone told me everything: shock, guilt, rage, disbelief. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and I could no longer protect anyone from it. That night, Rachel locked herself in the guest room and cried until her voice broke. I tucked the kids into bed as gently as I could and told them everything would be okay. They didn't see the papers. They didn't hear the shouting. They didn't know their world was shifting. But I did. And as I stood outside their room, I knew this was the beginning of a battle I had no choice but to fight. Rachel's breakdown didn't last long. By the next morning, she had slipped into a different version of herself, cold, furious, and determined to regain control at any cost. I could tell she had been awake all night from the swollen eyes and the way she kept clutching her phone like it was a weapon. She didn't speak to me while the kids ate breakfast. She didn't need to. The quiet was loud enough to be a warning. By noon, the first blow landed. A CPS caseworker knocked on the door, saying they had received an anonymous report claiming the children were living in an unsafe environment. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed, but the caseworker was polite and professional. She looked through the house, spoke briefly with the kids, and observed our interactions. She noticed the fridge stocked, the rooms clean, and the kids relaxed around me. Before she left, she pulled me aside and whispered that the report did not appear credible. I didn't need to ask who had filed it. Rachel pretended to be confused when CPS arrived, playing the role of a blindsided mother, but I caught the way she watched me, angry that her first attempt had failed. Her second attack came later that same afternoon. My bank alerted me that someone had attempted to withdraw nearly the entire balance of our joint account. Thankfully, Linda had advised me to freeze and separate most of my assets days earlier, leaving only minimal funds in the shared account. Rachel had stormed into the bank demanding access, and when they refused, she caused a scene loud enough that a manager had to escort her outside. She came home seething, slamming doors and muttering that I was trying to humiliate her. But she wasn't finished. That evening, she posted a long, dramatic message on social media, painting herself as a victim trapped in a marriage with an unstable, controlling husband. She implied I was abusive, hinted I was dangerous, and even claimed she feared for the children. Within hours, dozens of comments poured in: sympathy, outrage, offers for her to stay somewhere safe. But then something unexpected happened. People who knew us, her coworkers, neighbors, even some of her relatives, began questioning her story. Not one of them had ever seen me act the way she described. Several private messages trickled into my inbox from people who said they suspected she wasn't telling the truth. The public sympathy she tried to weaponize began slipping through her fingers. Her last and most desperate move came 2 nights later. I returned from putting the kids to bed and noticed the back door slightly open. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, only to find shattered flower pots, ripped screens, and muddy footprints leading toward the side of the house. Inside the garage, storage boxes were overturned, and several framed photos of my mother had been smashed intentionally. Rachel had broken in after storming out earlier, still holding a spare key she refused to return. She must have thought destroying the home my mother left me would pressure me into backing down. But she miscalculated. The security cameras caught everything. When the police arrived, Rachel screamed that it was her house too, though legally it was. She was handcuffed while insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The officers weren't swayed. After they took her away, the neighborhood fell into a heavy silence, and for the first time in weeks, I finally exhaled. The next morning, I received a call from Rachel's parents. Their voices were weary, ashamed, and deeply apologetic. They told me they believed me, not her. They said they would take Rachel in and keep her away from the children until the court hearing. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a shift in momentum. I wasn't alone in this anymore. But more importantly, the kids were finally safe. The temporary hearing arrived faster than I expected, yet the days leading up to it felt unbearably long. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights made everything look harsher, colder, less forgiving. Rachel sat on the opposite side of the room, wearing a neatly pressed blouse and clutching a stack of tissues even before the judge entered. Her lawyer, her third one in 2 weeks, looked exhausted, as if he'd been briefed only minutes before. When the judge took the bench, Rachel immediately adopted a wounded expression, the kind she used to pull during arguments when she wanted sympathy. But this wasn't our living room. This was a courtroom, and sympathy here was earned, not demanded. Her lawyer began by painting her as a devoted mother overwhelmed by stress, deceived by faulty DNA results, manipulated by a vindictive husband. He emphasized her fear of losing her children, her emotional distress, and claimed I was retaliating because I didn't want to share the inheritance from my mother. The judge listened, expressionless. Then it was Linda's turn. She spoke with calm precision, laying out the timeline of events like pieces of a puzzle locking into place. The DNA tests, the paternity fraud, the threats tied to the house, the CPS report, the attempted financial withdrawal, and finally, the footage of Rachel destroying property at the home where our children lived. Not once did Linda raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke loudly enough on their own. Rachel's face crumpled as each detail surfaced, her facade cracking under the weight of her own actions. She interrupted twice, insisting the DNA tests were wrong, insisting she was the one being abused, insisting the camera footage didn't show the whole story. The judge told her to stop speaking out of turn. Twice. When the judge finally addressed her directly, Rachel burst into tears, talking in circles about misunderstandings, about how she was scared, about how she didn't know what she was doing when she broke into the house. She tried to blame stress, grief hormones, anything that could redirect responsibility. But the judge didn't budge. He reviewed the documents in front of him and then spoke with firm, measured clarity. "Mrs. Harper, this court is deeply concerned by your behavior. You have shown a pattern of deception, manipulation, and instability that places your children at risk." Rachel sobbed harder, clutching her tissues like a lifeline. The judge continued. "Mr. Harper has demonstrated consistent responsibility, stability, and a commitment to the children's well-being. Given the evidence presented, the court grants him temporary primary custody." Rachel gasped, shaking her head violently. "No, please, you can't do that. They're my children." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but she jerked away. The judge ignored her outburst. He followed with strict visitation rules. Rachel could see the children only under supervision, twice a month, until further evaluation. I didn't feel triumphant hearing the ruling. I felt tired, drained, like someone who had been holding his breath for weeks and could finally inhale again. Rachel, however, unraveled completely. As the hearing ended, she stood and shouted across the courtroom, accusing me of ruining her life, accusing the judge of bias, accusing the system of being corrupted. Her lawyer quietly gathered his briefcase and walked away, leaving her mid-rant. By the time security guided her out, her voice had cracked into hoarse, frantic sobs. In the hallway, the children's guardian ad litem approached me and said she would be recommending therapy for both kids, given the chaos they had witnessed. I agreed immediately. They needed stability, not more conflict. As I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp morning air, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. The battle wasn't over yet, but the path forward was finally visible. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that everything might just turn out okay. The final hearing felt like the end of a marathon I hadn't trained for, a finish line I reached by sheer force of will rather than strength. The courtroom was quieter this time, heavier, as though everyone present sensed the gravity of what was about to happen. Rachel walked in alone, without an attorney. I wasn't surprised. Her last lawyer had withdrawn after she ignored his advice and sent a string of hostile emails to the guardian ad litem. She sat down with a trembling stack of papers, the edges wrinkled from being gripped too tightly. When the judge entered, she stood slowly, her face blotchy and exhausted, as if she had cried right up until the moment she walked through the door. The judge began by reviewing the reports submitted since the temporary hearing. Therapist notes, school statements, financial evaluations, witness reports. He read them silently, and with each passing minute, Rachel's breathing grew quicker, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. When he finally looked up, her eyes locked onto him with desperate expectation. He asked her if she had anything she wished to present before the court proceeded. She took a deep breath, stood shakily, and began to speak. Her voice was trembling, but she tried to project confidence. She insisted she loved her children more than anything. She insisted she had made mistakes because she was overwhelmed, confused, and pressured. She insisted that I had orchestrated everything to steal the children and the house from her. But her explanations had no structure, no logic, just spiraling emotions that contradicted each other. When the judge asked her to clarify certain statements, she grew defensive, irritated, then tearful, shifting tones so fast it made the room uneasy. Finally, when she realized her arguments weren't convincing anyone, she snapped. She slammed her papers onto the table and said something no one expected. Fine. If he wants them so badly, he can have them. I'm done. I'm done being punished for something everyone else does. Give Emily to Mark and Jacob to Ryan. They're the real fathers, right? A stunned silence followed. Even I didn't move. The judge stared at her, as if she had just confessed to something far darker than infidelity. He folded his hands and spoke with an authority that made the air feel heavier. Mrs. Harper, parental rights are not bargaining chips. Your willingness to discard responsibility is deeply concerning to this court. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She suddenly realized what she had done, what she had admitted. She tried to backpedal, saying she didn't mean it, that she had spoken out of anger, but the judge wasn't swayed. He outlined everything clearly and decisively. The court granted me full legal and physical custody of Emily and Jacob. Rachel would have supervised visitation only, scheduled and monitored by a court-appointed agency. She would be required to pay child support despite the lack of biological connection. The house my mother left me remained solely in my name, unaffected by the divorce. Rachel would bear responsibility for all court costs and fees, as well as the destruction of property she had caused. Her actions were also referred to the prosecutor for review of potential criminal charges. As for Mark and Ryan, they were ordered to provide financial support retroactively, each acknowledging their biological connection in the final documents. Rachel stood there, motionless, as the rulings were read, her face pale, her hands slack at her sides. She didn't cry this time. She looked hollow, as though she finally understood the irreversible consequences of every lie, every threat, every outburst. When the hearing ended, she left the courtroom without looking back. I walked outside into a gust of cool wind that felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply relieved. Relieved that the children were safe. Relieved that the storm had finally passed. Relieved that we could begin to heal. As I drove home, I thought about everything we had endured and how painfully close we had come to losing everything. But we hadn't. We had survived. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The house was quiet in a way that felt peaceful rather than empty. The children were asleep, their breathing soft and steady behind their bedroom doors. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to sit down without feeling the weight of uncertainty on my shoulders. The final ruling hadn't erased the chaos of the past months, but it had closed the door on the fear that had followed us like a shadow. I knew healing would take time. Long nights, gentle conversations, and rebuilding trust one small moment at a time. But I also knew we were finally moving in a direction that made sense. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the cool night air wash over me. The sky was clear, the stars unbroken by clouds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: quiet hope. Not the fragile kind that trembles at every setback, but the grounded kind that grows from surviving something heavy. I didn't know what Rachel's future held, and it wasn't my place to shape it anymore. My responsibility was here, with the children who needed stability, safety, and a home that felt steady beneath their feet. As I turned off the porch light and walked back inside, one thought settled in my mind with simple certainty. We were going to be okay. And that was enough.